Hello, happy Monday. Sort of a new week. I just am starting a new production. I had my first rehearsal this morning. Now I'm on lunch break, hanging out in Union Square Park, and gonna start Speedboat by Renata Adler finally. A bunch of new beginnings. Bibliosophie.
I have some cash.
Oh hi, now I'm rehearsing for another show tonight. I figured I should actually sit down and talk about something and not just keep making tiny snippets of day-to-day vloggage, which, you know, is fascinating, but at some point I should probably actually talk about books. I have not progressed at all in Speedboat, or barely. I like it. Actually, I truly find no fault in it, and I can't really quite get into it, which is kind of the problem I had with it when I took it out of the library in January, I guess. Yeah, I don't know why. There's nothing wrong with it at all. It's written in a way that's compelling. I think it's probably the just vignette-y aspect of it. So if I have it in front of me, I read it essentially, and if I don't really go for it. I don't grab it. I did start listening to When We Cease to Understand the World by Benjamín Labatut, translated by, I will get back to you, I forgot, sorry. I've just listened to, I think, about the first 2 sections, so a couple of hours of it. This is a kind of creative nonfiction, what is it called? Like a nonfiction novel is, I think, how it's described on the NYRB website. This is basically an investigation of various scientific breakthroughs of the 20th century, but especially the scientists, innovators, inventors, researchers behind them, and the kind of social toll of invention and discovery on a larger scale. So things like cyanide. It opens with a chapter called Prussian Blues, and so it's a history of cyanide, which is a byproduct of trying to create a pigment, a blue pigment that would be as good as ultramarine but not be based on lapis. And cyanide is a byproduct of that, which is why it has the name cyanide, which I'd never made the connection for, because it does give things a blue hue, but of course it is an extremely deadly poison. It was a hefty component of extermination during the Holocaust, and then kind of ironically also the kind of last-ditch suicide program of major Nazi heads as the war was winding down. That was sort of their fail-safe option to avoid trial. So it's this sort of thing, and then also the toll that research and discovery has on the people who research and discover, physically because they're experimenting on themselves, for instance, or emotionally, psychologically. Yes, I think it will, based on what I've read, I think it's going to get kind of more and more speculative. The first couple of sections are really just histories at this point. So I'm liking it quite a lot so far, and yeah, I'll update you on that.
I'm having a bad morning today. I woke up exhausted. I have a very long day ahead of me. I am massively late to rehearsal because of subway troubles. I feel terrible about that. I feel terrible in my own skin. I feel like I look horrible. And it's just taking all of my strength not to break down weeping on the subway platform right now.
Oh, hi. I just got home from my gig, ergo the beautiful mug. The dramatic lighting is a little bit more accidental, but obviously I chose to keep this on. I'm going to have late night supper before going to bed, but I figured I would talk for a second about some books again, and not just random books, the ones that I've been talking about anyway. I finished today Benjamín Labatut's When We Cease to Understand the World, and I don't really have much to add in terms of what it's about in some ways, because it continues in the vein that I described and that I found in the first few stories. I think they are kind of more unconnected stories in some ways, rather than one long novel. But there is obviously an overarching connection of theme, which is really actually what the title says. When we cease to understand kind of how the world works, that really is the case in the section that is also entitled That, which is about quantum physics basically, and the how troubling it is to be faced with a new paradigm of the world that isn't purely logical at all, and that is very paradoxical. Labatut has a cast of characters that includes, you know, the big men of 19th and especially 20th century science and mathematics, Einstein, Schrödinger, Heisenberg, etc. My, I guess, complaint of the book is that it is very much a narrative of the genius lone man of science in this case, and also the troubled genius trope, the person driven insane by intelligence and by passion for a subject. So these are tropes that are somewhat problematic to me, and it's a very myopic vision of what genius means also. The, you know, hermit, troubled artist in some way is something that I don't prescribe to, obviously, in my life, but also I think it's a very limited version of what passion and intelligence are. So those are kind of my qualms, but they're relatively limited. I definitely recommend the book. I think people get either really into or really upset by the fictionalized history aspect of it. I don't know exactly what is fictionalized. I think probably the the rapports between people, the internal monologues somewhat, but it is true people in true events. I'm neither blown away by it as a new mythical construct, nor upset by it at all. I love kind of reading people's reviews, like short user reviews on StoryGraph, for instance, and a couple of people were really put off by this and just, kind of buyer beware of I couldn't tell what was fiction or not. I didn't feel smart enough to pick out the history fact from fiction, but that seems moot to me. Yeah, that absolutely is not troubling to me at all. But also, I'm not mesmerized by it either, which kind of is the opposite side of the spectrum for people who really like the book. To me, it mostly just reads like a series of essays considering the destructive power of obsession, really, and of your vision of the world being threatened. Even if this time it's not, necessarily by another person. And then I started yesterday in my huffing and puffing of a morning, Playing in the Dark by Toni Morrison. This is a collection of 3 essays, and I've read the first 2. This is her consideration of whiteness and blackness in American literature, and especially the kind of white gaze of white authors, but also readers and critics, how much is left unsaid about the presence of blackness in American literature, how much American literature depends upon an unfree black other, essentially, as a component of it, sometimes as a very hackneyed component of its plot lines. In the first essay, she goes into Willa Cather, and there's some very interesting points made there. No, I recommend it. It's very slim. I think it's about, 100 pages all told? No, not even, 90. So I'll probably read the 3rd essay tomorrow. Good night. Now I'm gonna have some blueberries and some hazelnuts and some very buttery English muffins. I don't love being on boats. I just had a truly ridiculous amount of pasta after essentially not eating all day, subsisting exclusively on caffeine, which I don't actually tend to have that much of normally. So I'm not feeling great. It's almost like having a large pot of black tea, a cold brew, and a matcha, and then not really eating until 9 p.m. while being relatively busy is not the best way to go about your day. So if you didn't know that, let me just tell you. I feel like this vlog is essentially just devolving into me getting into relatively detrimental physical habits, low-level detrimental habits. I didn't have a theme for the vlog, so maybe that's it. Anyway, all joking aside, I have not really progressed at all in Speedboat, or barely. I've read about a 1/3 of it. As I said before, I have no issue with it. It's just too easy for me to set aside. I think because it is such short segments, spurts that feel somewhat unconnected to one another, even though there's obviously a broader architecture. But I recommend the book, and I have been just far too quickly setting it aside. Granted, in the past week, I've also read 3 other books, but that's because I have not been reading Speedboat. The most recent book that I read was something I essentially just inhaled over the course of a couple of days, Kate Zambreno's Screen Tests. This is my first time reading Kate Zambreno, and I've been curious about her for a little while, and I really, really enjoyed it. It's a series of really, really short stories that are sort of like micro essays, but also maybe kind of semi-fictional, you know, in that liminal space like so many things are, and then some more essay-y, memoir-y essays that are longer. In some ways it reminds me of Olivia Lang because there are some similar subjects. She is talking a lot about various art and literary figures, and there's a lot of overlap with the people that Lang talks about. So Kathy Acker and Andy Warhol, Gene Seberg, just a lot of Peter Hujar. So yeah, there's a fair amount of overlap, and actually I listened to this on audiobook partially. I partially read the ebook and partially listened to it, and I was caught by having this kind of feeling of recognition, feeling like it was reminding me a little bit of Eve Babbitt's, which makes some amount of sense. A lot of first person, kind of wry, kind of tossed off sentences that are still dealing with kind of cultural people and moments, and this mix of kind of the personal versus recounting a certain scene. So there are definitely some things in common, but actually I think the reason why for me it feels partially like Eve Babbitt's is because I recognize the voice, and I looked into it, and yeah, the narrator who does this book is also the same person who does all of the Eve Babbitt's books, basically. So I felt like I recognized a link in voice because I literally recognized a link in voice, which seemed interesting to me. Yeah, that's all. I'm taking it easy tonight. I'm gonna go to bed early. I'm probably gonna have some dessert anyway. And voilà, maybe read some more. Pims, orange Pims. I love them. They're like Jaffa cakes, if you don't know. They have to be orange. I don't fuck with raspberry.
You would have heard about it or something?
Yeah, I can't see it all. Just got back from dress rehearsal, and look what I found in my mailbox. This big chunker from Blackwell's. Lovely gift that I gave myself and paid for. What can it be? Oh, it's Tomb of Sand. So this is a summer project at some point. Chunky boy. Good night. It's a day, friends. The lead, of course, is that the United States Supreme Court overturned abortion rights officially this morning, which does not come as a surprise, but is horrifying nonetheless. But I have to admit that I'm also just kind of overwhelmed by my own petty sorrows and stresses. I have my own imbroglio of sadnesses that I've been dealing with, and little stresses around the fact that I'm leaving tomorrow for my next gig, and I have a lot of cleaning. I have been doing a lot of cleaning and just a lot of logistical last minute stuff. So it's kind of a weird position to realize the magnitude of some things, the smallness of some other things, and not quite be able to put anything in perspective. But I think that's a very human thing to do. In better news, tonight is the closing night of the opera I've been doing all week, and I'm very excited about it. I'm very proud of my personal work in it, very proud of the piece in general and the whole artistic team behind it. It's been really great. So, a lot of different layers of feelings constantly, which I think is also a very human trait. It's a weird day. It's been weird days. Currently it is not, but you know.
Food.
Food in general.
Yeah. But like, you know.
Greetings from California.
I took a flight this morning, not terribly early, 9:30, but it felt very early to have to rouse myself after a very long week, long couple of weeks, very long day, closing night, some light post-production festivities last night. I'm in California. I start rehearsals for a new opera production tomorrow, which I'm both excited and nervous about, which is kind of typical for me on the kind of first day of school type situation. It was good for me to be around people yesterday. I spent all day alone, and that sucked, quite honestly. So I actually left early to head up to the theater because I kind of didn't want to hang out by myself at home and clean and prepare and be anxious and be sad. So it was good to see people, and it was good to finish off that project. It was good to have some celebratory tacos and wine afterwards with the production. But yeah, on to the next. I finished, finally, Renata Adler's Speedboat, so I'm going to close off the vlog today because I didn't know that it was going to be the theme of the vlog, that I am trying to read this book, but I guess it became it. I started it last Monday when I was starting the first day of rehearsal for this past opera, and was just starting Speedboat, and so I'm gonna close it when I close that production. I'm heading into my next production and have finally finished the book. I don't have too many more plot details to give you, essentially. In a nutshell, this is a first-person narrative, as if it were essentially a memoir. A woman who is a reporter living in New York, but she is telling a lot about not just her friends and familiars and lovers in New York, but also people from her past in New England, as a prep school girl, as a student at an all-women's college, as in her travels as a reporter, going to the South. It's broken up into a series of longer chapters, but within those chapters, it's really small vignettes, as I mentioned earlier. Some of them a few pages, some of them just a paragraph or two. And there isn't really a through plot line. It's very disjunct, and not even in the kind of Jenny Awful style. There's an overarching plot, but it's broken up into a bunch of vignettes. This has even less plot, really. It's about our narrator's life, her apparently kind of hapless pursuit of love in some ways. It's about 70s New York and 70s United States in a broader sense. There's a lot of unease and kind of dilapidation. You really feel that the 70s are the curdled 60s in a lot of ways. There's the threat of violence and also ennui. It's very interesting to read this kind of book in the current climate, of course, even before yesterday, because so many of the themes of civil rights and kind of structural change are so much on our minds, or at least my mind now. And it's very peculiar because in some ways the world that she is painting feels so foreign. It's a New York, for instance, that I don't understand at all. And then in some ways it is usually, unfortunately, so recognizable kind of as on a political spectrum, the questions around, a bright new future or not, modernizing the United States, modernizing interpersonal relationships, modernizing structural establishments. So that's definitely been on my mind. I have not been a supremely enthusiastic or avid reader of this book, as you'll have noticed. As I said earlier, I have nothing against it. I can really understand somebody adoring it. I think it was difficult for me to read this week and last week. I probably needed something with more kind of through line. I needed more help, I think, by virtue of being tired, busy, stressed, overwhelmed, sad, all the various different things I've been feeling. I think I probably needed something a little less diaphanous. But I very much recommend it nonetheless. I liked reading The Afterword by Guy Trebay in the NYRB edition, in which he mentions the concept of this novel as a DJ, or the writer as DJ for a novel like this, bringing together kind of different aspects of storyline together without a super formalized structure. I like to think of it as this bouquet of illusions that kind of build up to something larger, but not in a very A to B to C to D way. And there's also a citation that I liked about the process of writing this from Adler. In Speedboat, something odd kept happening. Once I had an anecdote, and my intention was to keep going until I reached the whole point, my reason for telling it. I noticed that well before I got to what had seemed to me the point, I stopped. And I think that's a very good description of all of those vignettes. They feel like a series of on-ramps to something larger that Adler doesn't want to give us, or doesn't feel like she needs to give us. And instead, the series of little on-ramps kind of build up to a larger picture, but it doesn't continue from the next little step. So yeah. Well, that'll be it. I never, of course, filmed an introduction 2 weeks ago, and I'm not going to do one now. Often I do when I remember towards the end and I tack it on. I'm not going to. In honor of the deconstructed novel that is Speedboat, we're going to do something different today. if you've been watching, I hope you got to this point. My name is Sophie. This is Bibliosophie. If you're new here, you should subscribe. I'm great. You're great. Books are great. I hope that everyone is having a good, safe, and protest-filled Pride weekend. And yeah, till the next time. Bisous.